In the desert heart of North Africa, where caravans once bore salt and dates across golden sands, a new empire rose on the back of black gold. It was a land ruled by tribes and kings until one night in September 1969, when a young colonel named Muammar Gaddafi seized power in a bloodless coup. Few outside Libya noticed. But in that moment, the destiny of a nation and perhaps an entire continent was forever altered. Gaddafi's vision was born in the classrooms of colonial Tripoli, where he witnessed the poverty and ignorance that shackled his people. He vowed to harness Libya's oil wealth for education, healthcare, and the eradication of illiteracy. Within a decade, free schools sprouted in desert towns, free universities rose in coastal cities, and literacy rates soared from about 25% to over 75%. A nation that once begged for textbooks now produced scholars. By the late 1970s, Libya's oil revenues poured into grand social programs. Hospitals offered care without bills. Clinics reached remote oases. Roads cut ribbon-straight lines through dunes. Apartment blocks and villas, subsidized or free, sprang up in Tripoli and Benghazi. Young couples found marriage loans, interest-free and generous enough to fund weddings and down payments on new homes. A revolution of living standards swept across the desert. For women, the change was seismic. Under Gaddafi's constitution, girls attended the same schools as boys, competed for university placements, and emerged as doctors, engineers, and professors. In towns where women once labored in seclusion, you now saw female judges, taxi drivers, and airline pilots. Libya, the desert kingdom, was becoming the most educated country in Africa, and among the most gender progressive. But the colonel did not stop at domestic reform. He proclaimed that Libya's destiny lay not in isolation, but at the heart of a reborn Africa. The scars of colonial conquest still ran deep. Arbitrary borders, fractured economies, and a currency system that funneled wealth to Europe. Gaddafi believed Africa's salvation required unity, political, military, economic, and he was prepared to bankroll the dream. In Addis Ababa and Abuja, he pitched the idea of a United States of Africa. One passport, one parliament, one army. He pledged oil credits to build roads from Cairo to Cape Town, railways from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. He offered billions to establish a continental development bank. At every summit, he argued that African leaders must end the era of nation-state bickering and stand as one against the old colonial powers. Central to his plan was a new currency, the gold-backed dinar. For decades, African oil had traded in dollars or euros, extractive currencies that leached wealth northward. Gaddafi proposed minting a dinar stamped with Africa's emblem, fed by gold reserves mined in Ghana, South Africa, and Libya itself. This currency would settle oil and mineral trades, cut out Western bankers, and break the cycle of debt peonage enforced by international institutions. To critics, it was a fantasy, but Libya sat on over 140 tons of gold, the largest reserves on the continent. Gaddafi's plan was backed not by promises but by vaults full of bullion. If he convinced even a handful of oil producers to adopt the gold dinar, the global petrodollar system, pillar of American financial hegemony, could shudder. Gaddafi boasted that one bill of 5 dinars would be worth more in intrinsic metal value than $10 printed on Washington paper. Western intelligence brigades took note. In Paris, officials fretted over the future of the CFA franc, used by 14 former French colonies and pegged to the euro. In Washington, policy wonks debated the destabilizing potential of an alternative, reserve currency. Diplomatic cables later leaked described Gaddafi as more dangerous in glittering bullion than in desert guerrillas. His gold was a weapon. Meanwhile, Gaddafi's foreign policy funded liberation movements from Zimbabwe to Chad, Eritrea to South Africa. His revolutionary committees provided arms, training, and funds to guerrillas fighting apartheid and colonial rule. He welcomed exiles from Angola's MPLA and Mozambique's Frelimo into Libya's academies. Through radio broadcasts beamed across the Sahara, he urged African youth to rise against neo-colonial masters. Yet for all his rhetoric, Gaddafi's Libya was no democracy. Security services monitored dissent. Tribal rivalries simmered under the surface. In 1986, when he allegedly backed the Berlin discotheque bombing, President Reagan ordered American jets to flatten parts of Tripoli. Libya was branded a state sponsor of terrorism, slapped with sanctions that crippled its oil industry. But Gaddafi, ever the survivor, adapted. He wooed European firms back in the 1990s with profit-sharing deals and quietly built domestic infrastructure. By the new millennium, Libya had re-entered the global economy on Gaddafi's terms. He settled lawsuits over the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing, normalized ties with Britain and Germany, and even made a tentative peace with the United States. In return, Western companies secured oil concessions and lucrative construction contracts. Yet behind the handshake lay mutual distrust. Gaddafi saw his new partners as potential foes of his African project. Then, in December 2010, a Tunisian vendor's self-immolation sparked a wave of protest across the Arab world. Within weeks, Egypt's Tahrir Square was ablaze. In February 2011, Libyans took to the streets in Benghazi, demanding an end to 4 decades of singular rule. Gaddafi's forces answered with tear gas bullets and airstrikes. Soon, the protests escalated into full-blown civil war. The United Nations, citing the responsibility to protect doctrine, passed Resolution 1973, no-fly zone, and all means necessary to prevent civilian slaughter. NATO launched Operation Unified Protector. French Mirage jets roared over rebel positions. American drones provided targeting data. British commandos trained insurgents in secret desert camps. Within weeks, the balance had shifted. In the skies above Misrata and Sirte, Western bombs pounded pro-Gaddafi columns. His finest brigades melted away under assault. As NATO tightened the noose, rebels advanced on Tripoli's outskirts. Gaddafi, once untouchable behind his green tent, saw his regime unravel. He radioed frantic messages. "I will never abandon my people." But the world had decided his fate. On October 20th, 2011, cornered in Sirte, he attempted flight in a convoy of trucks. Rebel fighters ambushed it. They dragged him from a drainage pipe, bloodied and bleeding, no trial, no due process. In a maelstrom of anger and humiliation, he was executed on the spot. His body was displayed in a refrigerated meat locker, then buried in the desert under a concrete slab, hidden from history. The death of Gaddafi unleashed a tempest. In the power vacuum, rival militias carved out fiefdoms across Libya. Feuding warlords turned Tripoli into a warren of checkpoints. Militias trafficked migrants across the Mediterranean. Slave markets reappeared along the coast. A once prosperous welfare state collapsed into anarchy. Beyond Libya, African heads of state recoiled in fear. The gold dinar project died with its patron. France reasserted control over the CFA franc. IMF and World Bank programs resumed in West Africa. Western oil majors returned to fields once nationalized. And AFRICOM, the U.S. military command for Africa, expanded its footprint, citing counterterrorism needs. Today, the dollar remains king in African oil hubs. African nations still carry IMF debt. Regional integration trudges forward at a snail's pace. The dream of a United States of Africa exists mostly in summit communiques and academic papers. Yet in markets from Lagos to Luanda, whispers of Gaddafi's gold-backed dinar persist, as a symbol of what might have been. Muammar Gaddafi was neither savior nor simple tyrant. He was, to the end, a man of contradictions, the piper of Pan-African unity and the jailer of Libyan dissent, the patron of the oppressed and the sponsor of violence. When he died in a drainage ditch, it was not just a regime that fell, but a challenge to a world order built on Western currency and Western prerogative. His final act was to remind us that when a single man dares to unshackle an entire continent, the vultures of power circle swiftly,